From the Toronto Star, I'm Raji Mudler, and this matters. Are you ready to work from home forever? If you're an office worker, by now the buzz of working from home is long gone, and your company has given you a timeline of when you may eventually head back to the good old cubicle farm. Those return dates stretch from the fall to sometime next year. The other option that some companies have already taken is deciding that now is the time to allow permanent remote work going forward. A recent Angus Reid survey pegged it at a third of adult Canadians are currently working from home. And if a large portion of those numbers stay there would be huge implications. There's a ton of debate about this, from whether it can actually become a reality to some of the consequences, from the social and mental health issues to fiscal, like a recent Canadian Press report that discussed how salaries could be adjusted for employees who live in areas with lower costs of living. There are also the question of how many workers actually want it to stay this way. But today, let's just start with the decision and how businesses are attempting to adjust. We're going to be presenting two different sides of the working from home forever coin, with two companies that have made the choice, but for different reasons. Kennedy Gordon is the managing editor of the Peterborough Examiner. He'll be joining us to tell us why that paper has recently announced that it would become the first daily to go with a virtual newsroom. But first, let's talk Twitter. The social network decided a month ago that moving forward, it would give its employees the option of working remotely permanently going forward. To discuss this, we'll be joined by Paul Burns, Managing Director of Twitter Canada. Paul, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So Paul, while many of us have been thrust into working from home, your company, Twitter, has decided to make this a permanent thing. Can you take us through that decision-making process?
We've been talking and thinking about distributed work for years now. It's been one of our big focus points as a company. I think this pandemic, having everyone work from home, has actually proven that we can actually do this as an organization. It was a fairly straightforward lift for us to jump into a work from home environment and feel like it's somewhat normal. So we've been talking about this for years, and I think this moment really just said to us that actually we can actually do this as a company. And so I think that has given way to this idea that why don't we actually give our employees the ability to make that decision a permanent one? If they want to work from home forever, let them decide if that's right for them. So that's the nucleus and the genesis of the idea from our end.
Lots of stuff to talk about in there. And I think the first one I want to ask is, how much do you think this crisis is motivating this as opposed to your company's desire to work differently?
I think it's both. I think the crisis has demonstrated that we can do it. In many ways, it was a test. Can we actually work as a distributed workforce? Can we actually work remotely? The answer is a very resounding yes. But I think the starting point for the idea of a distributed workforce goes back a long time. And that's really starting from a place of our conversation and concentration as a technology company is largely based in San Francisco. I think if you think about talent, and as you think about the future of work, we are a global company. We work in almost every country across the world. Why do we have such a high concentration of people in San Francisco? Shouldn't we be able to, if you are talented and want to work for Twitter, shouldn't we be able to allow you to work wherever you happen to live? And so I think that idea and that concept of a distributed workforce was always sort of part of what we wanted to do. And this pandemic really just made it possible in many ways faster than I think we were ready for. But I think we've realized that it was actually more possible than we realized. The concept of a headquarters, in many ways, it's a dated concept. I think if you were to ask any one of the leadership members at Twitter why we have a headquarters, I think they would sort of tell you that that concept is going away, and our center of gravity should no longer be San Francisco. It actually should be distributed around the world. That's kind of the idea.
One of the first things you mentioned is the employee's desire. How important is that? And what if, say, the majority of the Toronto office wants it to remain and wants to come in?
Yeah, I think what this is really about is giving people the choice. And it's starting from a place of trust. And I think when you tell people that, hey, we trust you, we respect your choice, it actually ends up being a big vote of confidence for people. And this idea of work from where you're the most productive, we believe it's just good business. We actually think that every employer should look to maximize the happiness and productivity of their people. And so for us, I think it's based on, we're a very people-centric organization. And you hear companies talk about people first all the time. You hear them reference it in value statements. This is an example of that actually being manifested in how we act. It's really just empowering our people to work where they feel the most creative, where they feel the most comfortable and safe. And so I suspect we're going to see people who love this concept and want to, embrace it wholeheartedly. I also suspect there'll be people who don't have a life scenario that's conducive to working at home. And so they'll want to come into the office. So I'm not exactly sure how it will end up. I know we're going to learn a ton as an organization as we go through this, but the core principle behind all of this is give people the choice. Let them decide what's right for them and trust your people. That's the foundational principle behind this idea.
What I find really, really interesting about this is that it's Silicon Valley that really pioneered the idea of the office that you never want to leave. There's like foosball tables and there's free food. And Paul, I've been to your office. It's awesome. Right? So given the choice between, say, my office, which I can give up going to be quite honest, other than, of course, some social things, your office seems a lot more enticing to me. And part of this I find interesting is because you needed to make it cool because you wanted to attract talent. This is the way that things used to be, right? And the thing is you still have this prime piece of real estate that is still full of all these cool things. So I think a lot of your employees are going to want to go to that cool space.
Yeah, I think it depends on the person. We do have an amazing office. And our office and real estate team do an incredible job. We have free food. We have a space that is just, you want to spend time in because it's so beautiful and thoughtful and well designed. And that's intentional. I think there's intentionality in how we design our spaces that way. And so it is purposeful and it is a great place to be. And we want people to feel comfortable. Look, life gets in the way sometimes. I have a wife and 2 kids at home. There are people on my team who live multiple hours outside of the city, commuting in every day. If I can allow someone to work from home for a few days a week or every day if they just need to for that week, we want to give them the choice to do that. Every life situation is different, whether you're a single mom at home trying to raise a couple kids or whether you've got, parents that need help and support and you need to be close to them. We're trying to make sure that your life is important, your life is considered in your work, that we are thinking of those things as we make decisions like this. We do believe it's important. And at the end of this time on this planet, we're all going to look back and remember, the moments we shared and the moments we had. And I think we want to make sure that employees' time at Twitter was incredibly human-centric. And I think that's part of what we're trying to do here is give people the choice. I suspect you'll see a bit of both. You'll see people who love coming into the office because they miss seeing people. And there is a certain energy when you get a group of high caliber people together. But I also suspect you're going to have people who need to work home multiple times during a week. And I think what we're saying in all of this is just, that's totally okay. And we trust you. And that's a good decision if you want to make it.
Is there a little irony, though, that a Silicon Valley company, the ones that wanted us to come to your cool offices, is changing their ways right now?
Yeah, I don't know that we've ever stood on the soapbox and declared thou shalt work in an office. I think technology has made it possible to work from wherever you live and from wherever you are. I think if you were to speak to Jack Dorsey, our co-founder and CEO, he's been talking about this for a long time. And I think the concept here is to give people a place where they are the most creative, to trust our people. Maybe for some Silicon Valley companies, but I would say as far as Twitter goes, we've always believed that you have to trust your people to get the best out of them. You have to believe that they have the best intentions and put them in a space that is the most creative. Yes, we have amazingly beautiful and creative offices, but for some people, that may actually be their home, and they may need to be the most creative, the most comfortable, and the most safe at home. So we want to give people that option. I don't know that it's ironic. I think it's maybe an evolution of how we've thought.
Well, Jack Dorsey said in a conversation with Margaret Atwood at your offices about wanting to decentralize for a long time. I think one of the interesting things here is I just read a management firm study that's pegged lost productivity during this pandemic at less than 1%. Have you seen that? Would you concur with that?
You know what? I think initially when the pandemic was announced and we started working from home, we were one of the first organizations to sort of make that suggestion. We actually made that suggestion for all Twitter staff to work from home late February. And then we actually had a mandatory global office closure, I think March 10th, early March. So yeah, I think initially you saw people wrestling and grappling with the events that were occurring in the world and trying to reconcile what's actually going on. I think initially you also saw a whole bunch of enthusiasm and energy around this new environment that was set up. There was almost this honeymoon phase of people experiencing an entirely new working from home environment. And so it was new. I do think there was probably a moment where people had to calibrate. What does productivity look like in this new world? Even thinking about productivity, we have a whole bunch of new variables thrust into the equation. I think there are new dynamics in this world. And I would say, if I'm being honest, we probably saw productivity calibration with the team at the outset. But I don't think we've actually lost a whole lot of productivity. I think we've actually probably been more busy and probably felt more productive now than we've ever felt because we've allowed people some extra time in the day. So I think that's probably more true than a lack of productivity in this moment. I think the social aspect initially was just a lot of people trying to come to grips with what is actually going on in the world. That's maybe less about productivity. It's more about how do I stay healthy and a general concern about what was actually going on in the world. So that might be a more accurate way to depict sort of how we're facing this one.
You talked a little bit about the benefits, giving people the freedom of choice and helping them work to their best. What about the problems? Obviously, see, the biggest issue right now, one that I think I'm dealing with, is work-life balance. It doesn't really exist right now for me. So are you hearing anything like this from your employees?
Yeah, I think Twitter is an organization that we will always be very honest with ourselves, or at least we try to be. This is an example where we don't have all the answers, and we're going to learn a ton about what works and what doesn't in this world. And I think we've been very adaptable, and we're really good at listening to people. When people are saying certain things or certain things aren't working, we're pretty good to course correct and adjust based on what we're hearing from our people. And I do think work-life balance is a thing. It's hard for people to move from, their bedroom to the living room, and that's going from work to home life. There's no separation. So I totally connect with that and understand that. And a lot of that is just making sure that we give people the tools to make those separations more clear. How do you ensure that you're clearing calendar time for people or ensuring that you're actually putting blocks in your calendar for home life? From 9 a.m. to 9:30, you are doing math with your 10-year-old. You are giving people permission to block their days accordingly so that they actually can have a work-life balance. We've got a doctor on staff at Twitter. She's a psychologist, and she is available to help people going through stuff like this, wrestling with the emotional roller coaster of trying to balance kids, a home, all the psychological weight of a global pandemic, and trying to get work done. Services that we've made available to our people and to our teams, which I have taken advantage of in a big way. But a lot of it is just, not going into a situation like this, presuming you've got it all figured out. Going into a situation like this, knowing that we're probably going to make some mistakes, but we're going to learn a lot. And we're just going to be humble and intent on listening to our people. And if we need to make some adjustments, we probably will. That's, I think, the core. But I hear you, like the work-life balance, it's a tricky thing. And how do you give people the tools and support to make those changes? What I've been sharing with the team is if you need to take a day or a couple days, do it. If you're not feeling like you can make it work today, take the time. It's good to take a mental health day. It's not expected that you're on 24/7. And we know the emotional toll that this takes on people. There's a weightiness to what's going on in the world. And so I think as a leader, you got to be empathetic to those things and just be a really good listener. And if you do those things and people are vocal and are able to tell you what's working and what's not working, you tend to get to a good place fairly quickly. That's what we're trying to do.
So Paul, this is one of these things that I take things sometimes to further degree. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking about it, looking down the line, like 5 years, if we don't have offices anymore, like what happens to downtown cores or food courts or some of the larger issues? Have you given any thought to that?
Yeah, I'll speak from a personal perspective. I love being in the office. I get an energy from it. I love being around people. I love just seeing the vibe of a culture transformed in its people. So I miss that deeply as a leader, as an employee, as someone who gets energized based on other people. So I really do miss the physical aspect of an office. But at the same time, I love that I'm having dinner every night with my kids, that I get to wake up in the morning and spend time with them. I don't have a long commute into the office. There's some beautiful things that are restorative in many ways and giving me my family and my life back. So I don't know how to answer your question. I don't know if we're going to be in a world where commercial real estate completely disappears, but I do think I could see things changing with more flexible working environments. I don't know that every employer is there, if I'm being honest. I think Twitter is unique in this sense that we trust our employees and we want them to be as productive as they can be wherever they happen to be in the world. I don't know that every employer does that. I think there are a lot of employers that might not trust their employees as much and be concerned about, are they doing what we need them to do if we allow them to work at home? And so I do think we're in a privileged position from that perspective. But yeah, there might be real estate implications down the road. There might be, other considerations like traffic in the core and commuting and all other peripheral businesses. I don't think that's going to happen quickly. I think that's going to happen over a gradual amount of time. And I can only say that I think it's a good thing for people to have more of their life back and work in a place where they are the more productive version of themselves. I can only see that being a good thing.
Well, I think that's really, really great for us. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you think that we should know?
I think you captured most of it. Again, this is something that is not an easy, quick, light decision. It's something that's been talked about for years. This pandemic has accelerated this process for us. We're going to wait and see how it all unfolds, but we're excited about giving choice back to our people.
Paul, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
That was Paul Burns, Managing Director of Twitter Canada. Up next, we have Kennedy Gordon, Managing Editor of the Peterborough Examiner. He recently wrote a letter to his readers explaining that the paper was leaving its building and deciding to operate a virtual newsroom. This was a response to COVID-19, but also in part due to the challenging times that media are facing. He joins us to discuss why they decided to make this move. Thank you so much for being with us, Kennedy.
Hey, thanks, Roger. It's good to be here.
So, Kennedy, can you please take us through the thinking behind this? Is it fair to say that before COVID-19, this wasn't on the table, or was it?
I think it was on the table. I think that over the last decade, we've seen journalists more and more work away from the newsroom. People with cell phones and mobile internet rocket sticks, that sort of thing. So more and more, our staff was working from other locations, filing from where they were, as opposed to heading back to the newsroom to file their story. And Peterborough is a huge geographic area. Our county is an hour's drive each direction. So that became more practical for us to have people filing remotely and then coming back to the newsroom eventually, but the story was with us first. So I think that we kind of were moving towards that before all this happened. And I think it says a lot that when the edict came down to work from home in March, we were able to do that in an afternoon. There was no huge preparation involved. Everybody just packed up their laptops and away they went.
You guys are, you're a newspaper, but you're making the news here because while there are some companies, like we talked to Twitter, that decide to move forward. One, you're a media organization, you're a newsroom. This is one of the first announcements of a company that is doing this. What has been the reaction like so far?
We heard from people who said, wow, you still have an office. This, I think, will be par for the course for most media companies that don't rely on TV studios going forward. We are the first daily to do this, which I think has more of an impact. But it's because we've already been in this situation now for 3.5 months. Nothing huge is happening aside from we're going to stop paying for a building that we don't use. And that's really the biggest decision here. We're always looking for ways to save cost. And this obviously is the big one.
We both work for the same company, which is about to be sold. There are also some very, very obvious financial pressures on our industry. How much is that a factor? How much is it also so you're ready to say, you know what, I've lowered some of my overhead moving forward, depending on whatever hard decisions may come?
It's always a factor from my perspective. My monthly bottom line is something I have to watch all the time. I hope that my journalists don't think that way. Their job is to get the news and not worry about what's going on behind the scenes. But I mean, this sale that we're dealing with right now, the Examiner has had 5 owners in a decade. So we've gone through this a few times. This change with the building that's new. That's something that they're all adjusting to. And so far, the feedback from them has been pretty solid. They seem to understand exactly why we're doing it. They see the benefits. No huge concerns have been raised yet. We're only a few days into it, so we'll see how things play out.
You said it already, and it's funny. We launched this podcast right when COVID-19 hit. We have a studio at One Young that we spent a bunch of time getting ready, and other than some test things, we have never used. You said you moved in an afternoon. How much did the last 3.5 months show that you could do this? And have there been anything sort of disruptive in terms of the actual news gathering in your community?
Nothing disruptive. The disadvantage we have is that we had 2 new reporters starting at the beginning of March. So they had 1 week in our newsroom before they had to go home. And so I have not had the opportunity to work with these new reporters the way I have in the past. And that's, we're trying to do video calls and telephones and emails and things like that. But they are missing out on the experience of being in a newsroom with experienced journalists, with unexperienced journalists, whoever may be there at the time. But they've missed out on that. That, to me, was the biggest part of my journalism experience in the 80s and 90s, was being part of crazy newsrooms. They're never going to have that. And that's the biggest shame to me of all of this.
You've just hit on one of my next questions. Newsroom culture is definitely a thing. We're actually seeing in the US, where obviously there's been some controversial things about reporters speaking up. Now, that said, in this virtual world, how do you maintain that? There's so much institutional knowledge I know that I have gained from older reporters and senior reporters in my time, in my place. And that happened because I could walk over and ask them a question. How do you keep that going?
I don't know if we can, and I don't know if we should either. So this is kind of happening at the right time, I think. There has to be a culture shift in newsrooms to begin with. And if this is the way it happens, not the end of the world. After we posted the news of our virtual newsroom a couple of days ago, I started hearing from former colleagues at newsrooms I've worked in over the last 30 years. And most of the stories they wanted to share were stories that would not be polite today. Let's put it that way. So moving forward, I think that as we have the new reality we live in now with people's heightened awareness of social justice and things like that, getting away from that old style of newsroom, I think might be for the best.
What's been the response from the community?
Not much, to be honest with you. So far, the most I've heard is people commenting that they weren't even aware that we had moved 7 years ago to a different location. We've had 4 offices in the last 20 years. People are sort of used to the Examiner being a mobile operation, let's put it that way. Yeah, not a whole lot of reaction. Most of the reaction we get whenever we announce something new like this is someone points out a typo. So I'll take it.
How about you? You're obviously been working from home for this time. What has been the biggest adjustment for you?
Nothing huge. I'm working the same way I always did. I mean, we have a small newsroom. And even when we were in the building, I could quite often go hours without seeing any of my staff because we're out covering news. So we coordinate things the way we always have. I get to wear shorts every day, which is great. And the paper is doing solidly. Our numbers are actually higher than they've ever been, thanks to COVID-19, unfortunately. But the paper's fine. The paper is always going to be fine. Where we work from doesn't really matter. The product is what matters.
I know it's only been a couple of days, but has your staff flagged anything moving forward that they want to either discuss or, and how have they responded so far?
So far, so good. Like I said, they've been at home for 3 months. We're making sure that everybody is taken care of as far as equipment and supplies goes, so that people can have their office chair, their desk, whatever they need to turn their home office into a working space that they're comfortable in. So that's been really the priority over the last few days, is making sure that everybody has the equipment and supplies they need. I'm sure headaches rise as we go forward, but one thing about being a small newsroom is that everybody's on the same page and we communicate really well. So I don't anticipate any huge hurdles there.
Kennedy, what are you going to miss? I made a crack with the Twitter guy about when I spoke to him about Silicon Valley pioneer offices that, no one wanted to leave. And I've been to the Toronto office and it was beautiful. I made a joke then that One Young isn't all that nice. But the funny thing is that, I went in to get my office chair this past weekend and I just had one of those moments. I've been in this place a really long time. The newsroom is romanticized, but it is also a pretty cool place. What will you miss? And are there any good memories that you can share?
Well, I've spent the most of my career in 2 newsrooms, the Sudbury Star in the 80s and 90s, and the Examiner for the last 15 years. And mostly it's the people. I mean, there's nothing like a newsroom for bringing together a huge collection of egos and personalities that can work really well together and clash at the same time. So the things I will miss is not the noise of the scanner or the sound of the press starting up. It's going to be the people, even the conflicts, which there have been quite a few. The mix of people coming together to get one job done. That's what I'm going to miss, having all that in the same room.
What do you think about this as a trend?
I think this is the way it's going.
Kennedy, I think this has been really great for us. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you think that we should know about this?
I think it's just the most logical thing to do with everything else going on right now. I would love in the future if we suddenly decided to open a storefront and customers could walk in and readers could knock on my door and say, here's something I heard about. I would love that to happen again. I don't think it's going to. I think the world has changed too much.
Well, Kennedy, that's fabulous for us. We will be reading. So thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you.
Kennedy Gordon is the managing editor of the Peterborough Examiner. That's it for today. Thanks so much for joining us. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Rajan Budhar, Adrian Chung, and Saba Etisas. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our director of programming is JP Foso. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.